Greetings and welcome to another Grenfell MediaWatch update. Today's edition I want to call The Power of Testimony. Now last week the media was dominated with tales of the commemoration hearing that's taking place at the public inquiry. And I want to quote the words of Claudia Davis. And she said something along the lines of, I want to argue with someone, I want to scream at someone, I want to deal with it like we'd deal with it on the streets. So you listen to us, Martin, and do right by us. And to his credit, Martin said that they'll do their best. So last week, there was much media focus on the tears and the agony. And if you watched any of the clips or some of the streaming, I'm pretty sure, like me, you've moved to tears hearing some of those testimonies. It was a right choice, a right decision, and a recognition of the power of the Grenfell community to be advocates for themselves and to focus this inquiry in the right direction. But it hasn't been as much focus on the missing chairs. And I'm talking about the absence by government, by MPs of James Brockenshire and Nick Hurd, who as ministers responsible for housing for the Grenfell community, their presence was duly noted. So in light of that political void, let's examine the politics that's surrounding the situation right now. The 156-page Hackett report, which pretty much was a Hackett job. Well, actually, I'm being a bit discourteous. Hackett's report did have some good recommendations. It took a holistic approach to changing the whole regulatory framework around building, even though, of course, this is something that could probably take a decade to put in place. But some of the recommendations, like having a 3-yearly review for products that were critical when it came to safety, were interesting. But of course, the big issue that everyone focused on was the fact that there was no explicit ban for cladding or flammable cladding products. Anyway, whilst I won't go as far as saying the government should be applauded, we should recognise the fact that it's actually made a decision that it's going to consult on the possibility of banning flammable cladding. And now this is something that should have happened months ago. Oh, and whilst it is good news that there's a possibility of a cladding ban, it's very important that people like Lammy don't take credit for this potential outcome. If you've read his Twitter feed, you would have seen a ill-judged tweet claiming that him and his parliamentary colleagues were responsible for this outcome. They weren't. The reality of the situation is that it's the Grenfell community, those who have been campaigning and protesting and joining the silent walks and all these other activities that have meant people like the leaseholder residents in Croydon who have been asked for 30 grand to take off the cladding from their property. Now that's thankfully been changed because Barratt Development has said that they're going to cover the cost, but this government has so far even ignored the advice of its own Equalities and Human Rights Commission, who said, like, as in Germany and the USA, there should be a ban on cladding. I think we should also acknowledge that up and down the country, residents in social housing have been left to fend for themselves, really. Their complaints continue to be ignored since Grenfell. So where are we on the issue of safety? Well, the London Fire Brigade has actually now reversed its stay put policy and is telling the 100+ residents of tower blocks across the capital that if there is a fire, get out. And I think that decision took some courage. Even if we have grievance, which many of us do, with the stay put policy on that night, I think it's totally inappropriate for media institutions to be branding firefighters as jobs worths. It's one thing to be writing behind a computer. It's another thing to be tearing into a building that's burning down and trying to save lives at the risk of your own. Now, there was an excellent piece on the firefighter who heroically saved 9 lives, and he makes the comment that politicians always talk about lessons learned. I hate that phrase, but they never do learn the lessons. I mean, I was watching whilst they were talking in Parliament about the potential cladding ban, and some of them couldn't even focus on their jobs while just sitting in a chamber. But the fight for justice continues, and as it starts to rain right now, it reminds me that In Wales, fire sprinklers are now mandatory on all new builds. Now we also know in Wales they're planning to ban flammable cladding. And I wonder whether this is going to take place in Wales faster than it takes place in England, despite the fact that there's far more resources here, but of course much less political will. Anyway, before I get drenched, and I don't want to get caught in a repeat of the lightning that took place yesterday, let me give you a status update. Of the 210 households that were affected by the Grenfell massacre, 130 are still in temporary or emergency accommodation. This is almost a year on. This really ain't good. In a letter to survivors, the government has also announced that it will either heavily restrict or ban the use of desktop studies, and these are the on-the-cheap fire tests that were done to save money when testing materials or building materials for their combustibility. We now know that the company that provided the 45 doors ceased trading in 2014, and that the hot point fridge freezer that was the spark for the fire actually was built to safety standards. But I think one of the most interesting things we learned last week is that the government has actually admitted that the use of the cladding on Grenfell was unlawful. Sadly, there hasn't been any update from the Met on their criminal investigation, other than the fact that they're charging a couple of homeless people for fraud, and the Sun, in its usual snide manner, trying to smear the entire Grenfell community with one of its stupid headlines. But I think that's about it. Now, this is the final week of the commemoration hearing, and I hope that those survivors, the bereaved, the residents, all those people affected directly by the Grenfell massacre know that we admire you for your strength, your courage, your honesty, the fact that you're fighting not only for yourselves and your families, but also for all of us living in social housing. I'm going to close as ever and say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Asher.